It's no secret that Patagonia is one of the world's most admired companies. But what might surprise you, do it again. Vincent Stanley. It's no secret that Patagonia is one of the world's most admired companies. But what might surprise you is some of the painfully challenging moments they faced with courage and integrity along the way to earn that reputation. Vincent Stanley is one of the earliest founding leaders of Patagonia and co-author of the book, The Responsible Company, with Patagonia's founder, Yvon Chouinard. In this episode of Moments of Truth, I talk with Vincent for an intimate look at some of the more difficult moments Patagonia navigated that earned them their remarkable reputation. Take a listen. So you know, throughout your book, you chronicled so many, I maybe the first time through I wasn't appreciating this, but profound inflection points as Patagonia over the last 4 years have become who they are. And they all seem like seismic moments. And you so eloquently described them. So I can't imagine, but do any of them, are there one or two that you feel most proud of? Are there any one of those moments that stick out to you as more formative than others, or ones that really were taxing?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that probably the two that were most critical were the change from pitons to chalks.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I think that was critical is we made that at a time when the company was very, very small. It was a huge investment for a company that did less than $1 million a year to get the tools and dies for the whole range of materials they needed. And the move was successful because of the catalog, this reaching out to that community. And, 70% when it changed in 9 months from the business relying 70% on pitons to 70% chalks. And so that article by Doug Robinson that argued why climbers should switch gear and how to use the new gear had just been discussed at every climbing club, at base of every climb, and every magazine. And it gave us a message that we didn't use for many years. It's not something that we said, oh, now we know something. But it taught us that if you talk to customers and employees, for that matter, as friends and equals, that if you've become persuaded of something that you didn't expect to be persuaded of, that other people can go through the same process. And that came into fore when we made the switch to organic cotton. So I think that was the second great pivotal moment.
I mean, obviously, one of the many things the world holds up Patagonia for is how incredibly purpose-driven you are, which I know is no easy feat to become. In your book, you say no responsible company can function well without a lot of different people doing things they love to do it in concert with others. Doing what you love to do makes work meaningful, and doing the right thing with others makes work meaningful. Mm-hmm. TDM is easy to take when it has meaning. I read that, with such joy, knowing how hard it is to make it true. Right. It's a beautiful statement. The whole world is purpose washing now to try and look purposeful.
Yeah.
But so what I'd love to hear, Vincent, is how have you embedded that reality into Patagonia? How do people doing tedious work find meaning in it? What are the practices? What are the habits that have made that true at Patagonia?
I think when you allow people, when people can connect their work to something that they love and to some value they hold, then they feel liberated.
Are there ways that you practically help people make that bridge? Are there conversations you host, or how do people, if they're not sure what they love or they know their values, but how do they, what is the way you create, what's the environment you create that helps them actually discover that connection?
I think it's mostly just permission. I don't think it's something that you can create or engender in a community, but you can signal permission and you can give actual permission. I mean, it's, an example of that is when we started the Footprint Chronicles, which is the interactive website. Yep. We had no budget and no staff. So there were just a bunch of us that got together on that, and we thought this is a fantastic idea. We're gonna do this, and it was almost like a volunteer activity. But once again, because it was something that was close to the values of the people involved, we got it done, and then everybody saw its value, and the company adopted it more fully. So I think there's this. It's interesting to me. I'm a birth Catholic. I'm not a Catholic, and have never been in my adult life. But there's social justice. They have two principles which I think are really interesting, and one is solidarity, which we all understand, and that's also become very important, I think, at Patagonia. But the other one is subsidiarity, which is that anybody, if a decision is going to be made that affects people, they should be involved in that decision. And it also involves pushing decisions down. We're not always the best at that, but I think that you get the best work when that happens.
So I heartily agree. In your governance structures, in your meeting structures, when people come together to make decisions or they come together to contribute to that subsidiarity, are there practices that you see operative at Patagonia that help that along?
Yes, I think there are. They may be they're informal mostly.
Even better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have a cafe, so people have lunch together. People exercise together over lunch or through the day. If the surf's up, or they go on a bicycle ride. A lot of people are friends. So there are a lot of different networks besides the formal network of meetings. And there's a kind of understanding that ideas can come from anywhere. I think that those are the things that feed it. I'll give you an example. This is after the book was written, but it's one of my favorites. Right after Trump was elected, that was early November, and we were facing Black Friday, and we were trying to figure out what to do. And we had planned to close our stores, black out the windows, and put up notices saying, go volunteer for an environmental organization. On Friday, before Black Friday, everything was in place. My wife had been working with the social media people, and on Monday morning, I was back at East, and I hear that something is up. What happened is somebody fairly low on the e-coms team, new employee, came in and said, we're doing this all wrong. And what we should do is keep the stores open. Instead of giving our 1% for the planet, give 100%. So that idea got floated up, and by 11 o'clock, the CEO had committed. By 1 o'clock, the company had committed, and we did it. And so ordinarily we would do $2 million that day. We did 10 million. 30% of the customers were new, which anybody in marketing will tell you, to get, and all the sales were at full price. We had some people come in on Monday, the following Monday, saying, I just went a little crazy. Do you mind if I bring some stuff back? And we said, sure.
One of the things you said was doing the right thing motivates us to work past the point where we might otherwise give up, which is a beautiful characteristic of a culture that's still committed to its mission. It calls into question accountability, right? So how do your accountability systems keep justice in them when people are that committed? So talk about that part of Patagonia and how not just the measuring of results, but how you honor the contributors, not just the contributions. How do you balance all that in such a committed culture?
That's an interesting question, and I'm not sure we do a good job. And it's hard to, even with our systems, for instance, I'll take the other side of what you're mentioning, which is that if even in our performance appraisal system, there's individual recognition. but there's no recognition for teams.
Mm.
And most work, I think, is done by groups of people.
Mm.
And I don't think we figured out a way to honor that. And in a way, I think that we often haven't figured out a way to honor or express gratitude to really wonderful efforts by people that fall outside the. We haven't been as good at that as I think we should be.
And that's fair. And I appreciate the humility and the honesty there. Organizations, as they scale, have silos. There are boundaries that people have to permeate.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, there seems to be an incredible spirit of cooperation, the solidarity you talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
How have you seen that work across boundaries? How have you seen collaboration and a spirit of solidarity scale with you? Mm.
Well, I think one of the key drivers is constraints. So, if you are a conventional apparel company, you can go to FIT Fabric Library and choose from thousands of fabrics. And if you're from Patagonia, you can choose from maybe a couple hundred. But you have to know those fabrics well, and you have to go through the process of really figuring out how to use them, how to make the best use of it. And if you don't have the answer within your group, you have to go outside to the next group. So what's happened with the business model of the company, I think, is particularly in the last 10 years, that innovation is driven by constraints. Innovation has created the new business for the company.
If I asked you to, what would you attribute that? What creates the sense of permission to go across those borders and not worry that someone's going to meet you with a sense of resistance? Or what would you say was in the water of Patagonia or in the systems that enable people to go do that?
Yeah. Well, I do think that having a well-defined purpose really does help. And having had it for a long time. So it's interesting for me when I talk to people at other companies, nobody has anything written down to the extent we do about their values. We've got 2 books. We've got an articulate website. We've got films. And I can compare that to having been at the company for 20 years without any of those things, and then trying to make a decision in the late 1980s or early 1990s without a firm sense of what we were about. Yes, we gave 1% of our sales away to environmental causes, but who we were as a business was fairly conventional. It was a conventionally defined business that gave money away, with a lot of unconventional people in it. And so now it's a different story. And I think that if everybody has a shared sense of what the company is about, anything related to that purpose is going to become fairly open. There may be real questions about how to honor it. There may be real questions about tensions between one action and another, but it doesn't go out of mind. I think you get the siloing, and you still see it at Patagonia. I mean, I used to run the wholesale division, which was the dealers, and that was, then we had the direct, we used to call it mail order, and then the retail stores. And so we would get competitive internally about inventory for my dealers versus inventory for retail. Those kinds of things happen. And I think if you do define clear guidelines and clear guardrails, you can also eliminate or minimize those silos, or create a process by which conflicts can be resolved.
So if leaders were coming to you to say, we all want to we all want to shout at Patagonia, but it's not possible, but they really had a genuine desire to shape a culture of real purpose, besides reading your wonderful book, The Responsible Company, what advice would you give them?
You know, the advice I give, and I don't know if it's good advice or not, quite frankly, but I really think, you know, this saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast is absolutely true. And so I think what you need to find, you need to discern what the strength of the culture is and how it's individual. You know, every snowflake is alike, every is different, every human being is alike and different, every business is alike, but there's some critical difference. I've never walked into an office and not noticed that it had its own individual, something that made it what it was. And I really think people don't look at that. I think people, especially when they're doing strategy, they're saying, oh, well, I want to be like my competitor who's 20% bigger than I am, and then I'll have more market share. And in fact, if you want to unleash, if you want to amplify the power of your organization, you have to figure out what those critical strengths are, what your voice is, and then figure out what you stand for on the basis of
Yeah.
Just to mention, this is very new for us, and I think it will be really important for the future. Is we created a platform called Patagonia Action Works, which enables people to look up in their area and whatever cause they're interested in. If they love trees or they love oceans, they can hook up with that organization and volunteer their time or give them money. And so I think we have this tremendous opportunity to build our relationships with customers and with those groups over time, which again, I think just strengthens. I just view our business model as deepening our roots in some way. And it gives you an opportunity to deepen those roots.
It's such a great point. It almost seems as though, I mean, and you've been at this for 40 years, so, but there's this sort of inherent cultural flywheel that's been in motion for so long that, and for me, as I read the story of all those, 9 or 10 major inflection points that you chronicled in your book, it just seemed to me that because each of them both was emblematic of and also reinforcing of that flywheel of values, it just seems like it's so endemic to who Patagonia is now. And I would love leaders to understand, if that's what you want, that's the work it takes.
Yeah.
There's no silver bullet. You can just go take a pill and suddenly you're Patagonia. What does it take if a leader is going to set course on that journey? It's going to require tremendous patience and a level of resilience. What would you advise them about that journey?
I think there are two or three key things to keep in mind. And you go down that journey, after a while, what looks like an impassable stream that you have to ford turns out to be something you know how to do. And also that risks start to look like investments. And I think that there are two things to pay attention to. The 80-20 rule always holds, so there are going to be 3 or 4 things that you have to pay attention to in your product line or your service that are going to make or break you. But at the same time, I think businesses operated far too narrow a focus, and almost all businesses get drawn down a path that's not so successful by not their strengths, but by their weaknesses. And so I like the model of running a household. I mean, if you got to get the food on the table and feed the kids and do 20 other things, and you can't ignore any of them. And I think this business model of saying, okay, we're going to concentrate on 3 things and we're not going to concentrate on anything else, that's when you lose the engagement of your employees. That's when you fall vulnerable to egos.
Stanley, this has been such a delight. I've learned a lot. Yeah, I'm so grateful for your insights and for you willing to share your story. So thank you for giving me your time.
Well, thanks for your questions.
Have you ever had something in your past that you've not wanted to talk about? This individual experience is also something that happens at a communal level. This was the experience of many in the Fillmore district of San Francisco. The People's Temple, led by Jim Jones, is just blocks from where Jarrod Shappell lives. But until 2018, over 40 years since that mass massacre, San Francisco did not even recognize the residents that were lost. On this episode of Everyday Justice, Jarrod Shappell sits down with Jada Curry to talk about her work to honor this erased past so that a community can heal. Take a listen.
Well, welcome to Everyday Justice. I'm Jarrod Shappell, and during this segment every week, we are talking to people who inspire me, who are advocating and organizing and really fighting for justice, whether in their city, their town, their community, their industry, their organization. And today I am joined by a neighbor of mine, basically, Jada Curry. She is a USF student. She is a member of an organization called NCLF and a wonderful community organizer. And I'm really excited for her to be here today and share with us. So Jada, thank you so much for making time to be here with us today.
Absolutely.
So good to see you.
Yes, nice to see you too.
Jada, I think it might be helpful. So we both live in San Francisco. We live relatively close together, but in some way to each other. But in some ways, our neighborhoods are very different, even though they're blocks apart. And you know, I found out not that long ago that I also historically would be considered the Mo. You know, it would have gone up to my street. But the historically Black neighborhood, the Fillmore, is an area where you and NCLF spend a lot of your time. So I would love to just hear a little bit more about kind of the work of NCLF and what you do in the Fillmore district here in San Francisco.
Yeah. So NCLF, we're a nonprofit-based organization. As you said, we're based in Fillmore. That's where most of our work is. But of course, we collaborate with many other groups, notably SF Block, SF Mega Black, and we like to collaborate around this mission of engaging not only the Black community, even though that tends to be most of our focus, but many different disenfranchised communities. But specifically what we like to do at NCLF is engage folks through, cultural upliftment. So that can be programming in some of our events. We like to bridge social gaps. So we would have chess tables. We had a chess community actually, which of course with COVID, we haven't been able to get together and play at the park like we usually do. But to bridge those gaps, especially in age differences. We also like to preserve history in many different forms. We are actually working on a project right now with the Steiner Bridge and kind of analyzing how that has been a almost symbol of the gentrification that took place in the Fillmore community. We also focus on economic development, personal growth, and then artistic empowerment. And to stop myself from going on and on, I'll keep it there.
So I love though that it's so holistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're not just focused on the art aspect. You're not just focused on kind of the age disparity and bridging that gap. You're thinking about a lot of different things that impact your community. And I think that that's something that when I first found out about NCLF, I was very moved by, right? To be thinking about not just singular moments of injustice, but kind of a way to make, kind of the whole system just. One of the things that jumped out to me was a story that I think the very first time we met, you told the story about the Jonestown commemoration. And at first I was like, I don't understand. I knew a little bit of the history of the Jonestown, the community and the events that happened there and its connection to San Francisco, but very little. And then, through talking to you, I found out that the People's Temple, which you can give us all this background, but is like the post office today. And I walk,
Yeah.
I walk by and use that post office all the time. And yet the community as a whole had been pretty quiet on it. So it's probably going to require all kinds of, you're going to have to give us a little bit of a history lesson here, for the people that don't recall the Jonestown Massacre and kind of certainly its connection to San Francisco. But I would love to hear just kind of the history and the story. And then, I mean, it was last night, right? You did the Jonestown commemoration last night. So it was very timely. Just kind of what NCLF is doing to commemorate that and why you think it's so important to the community that be something the NCLF do. So educate us, history professor.
Yes, yeah. So so the event that actually took place, the one that I would say is most notable for people who, when you start to engage in the conversation about Jonestown, is November 18th, 1978. So that's actually when the tragedy took place. That's where I'm sure everything hit the news. And that's mostly when you start talking about that conversation, that's what people know about. And most notably, of course, there's it's almost kind of sad to say, but the jokes that come along with, don't drink the Kool-Aid, this and that. And actually, if you talk with one of the people on our planning committee, Professor Taylor, brilliant. He's the USF professor. So he's actually the historian in the group who he'll give you the rundown on why that may not be as accurate as some people think. But in terms of its connection to San Francisco, this is the part that I even have to enter this conversation and say, it's I don't even know how to describe the feelings that I had when first hearing about its connection to San Francisco, because when I remember we briefly touched upon this in school, and when we did, it was definitely not from this is a factor of our community and how it changed, how it almost will never be the same. I never learned about it from a perspective like that. It was simply this was a man, all these crazy people got up and they started to follow him and things happened, and that was it. But that's exactly what NCLF is trying to do, is change that narrative and give more so of an understanding and humanity back to the people who lost their lives, because a lot of them came from San Francisco, a lot of them came from LA, and then of course with the great migrations that happened, a lot of them also maybe came from the South, also from New York. So this is something that we also want to recognize, because there's so many different people from so many different places that are interplayed into this. And on top of that, just Oakland, for example, if I'm remembering correctly, they've commemorated this from, I want to say, almost the beginning, from when it happened or not so long after. And San Francisco has never had a public commemoration before. And there's a lot behind why that's also important, because not so much to focus on Jim Jones, but there are certain things that enabled him to get into positions of power that allowed him to move the way that he did. And that needs to be recognized. That needs to be recognized, because there's amends that need to be made, because those things that have not been amended still affect the community in ways that we do not even know. And particularly coming from a young person, I didn't even know about it. I had no clue that it had a connection to this city. But it's something that, even though there's the amends that need to be made, and when we do reach that, there are still many lives that have been lost that are our neighbors. They were family members. So yeah, that's where I'll keep it for now.
I'm curious, for people that are listening and, they're hearing kind of, Jonestown is this epic story, right? And an epic, heartbreaking tragedy, and kind of the ripple effects of that can feel clear, right? Kind of the generations of people impacted, and, you're talking about its exposure of some of the systemic issues in our cities and other places. So it might feel very big, but I'm curious, when you think about the work of remembering and commemorating, the work of dignifying the stories that maybe people have stuffed away and avoided, If somebody is inspired by our conversation today and the work that you and NCLF are doing, what would you say is an everyday action that they could take to embody some of the same justice activities, I'll call them, that you're doing, in doing this Jonestown commemorating?
Yeah, when you ask that question, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is practicing. And this is something that you can never like fully reach. You have to practice this. I feel like at every stage of wherever you are in life, is cultural humility. Because when you actually practice cultural humility, you can open your mind to things that you would normally shut off. So, and that's technically, that's what most of the responses we get when we kind of start engaging in the conversations around Jonestown. Most people will come to us and, again, those dismissive comments of, no, that's crazy. But if you actually take a time to listen, actually sit down and listen and look at the perspective of those who went. And this is where the cultural aspect comes in, because if you look at the Black community at the time when Jim Jones came into place, you will start to already get a better picture of maybe how people felt like he could have been a hope, how people felt like the land that he promised could have been better than where we were at that time, as maybe a culture, maybe a community. So when you actually go in your day-to-day life and you actually practice cultural humility, I feel like that's the starting point to have interactions with people who you would, again, just dismiss. And that alone, I feel like, again, and that's only a starting point. And there's so many other things that we could probably both think of. But that to me would be almost the start.
Oh, I love that. And like, what a timely word. What a timely word for us as a people to remain curious about why someone would behave the way that they do. Or why a group of people would come together around an idea.
Right.
That curiosity would serve us very well right now. So
yes.
Thank you for that. Jada, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your heart and for the work that you do in my neighborhood, in our city. I'm just really grateful to have met you and grateful for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Jada.
Hope is the key ingredient for organizations and leaders who want to become who they promise to be. I've never had an executive call me and say, "Can you help our organization build some hope?" I have, however, met many executives who should have called me to ask that. It's hard to quantify hope's presence, but if you've seen an organization that has lost it, then you know just how bleak things can be. Hope is created at the intersection of passion, a desire for something greater, perseverance, the need to prevail against great odds, and faith, the belief that there is something greater beyond those odds. When a leader, an organization, or even a country is facing its darkest days, hope is what gets them through. We've all been burned by organizational hypocrisy and felt tempted to give up hope. Hope requires us to place our confidence behind an endeavor without necessarily having the tangible evidence to back it up. But when things start to falter and that hope is dashed, that's when the most talented people quit and leave, and the mediocre talent quits and stays. Where have you lost hope? Where do you find hope? Think about it. Till next time, keep leaning into your moments of truth so that you can be the example of what it means to be honest.